Hello and welcome to Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, Radical Book Club edition. And I am here joined by Bobby B of the formerly, is it still the 5x5 podcast? Or have you rebranded?
We're working on rebranding, but I think it is probably going to go over to the Mustache Mafia podcast because that is cooler.
It's much cooler, and also I don't think there's another podcast called that by some right-wing chud, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I hope not. I hope not, man. Like somebody's probably squatting on it somewhere, but hopefully they won't notice us until it's too late.
Exactly, and then you can overtake them and say it was ours all
along. We'll expropriate it for the revolution and the greater good of the proletariat.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to have you on the channel, actually. This is the long-awaited second chapter in Homage to Catalonia. For those of you guys who are just joining us right now, the link to the first Homage to Catalonia chapter that we went over is in the description. And what we've been talking about, the George Orwell classic. If you're not familiar with Homage to Catalonia, this is George Orwell's memoir of when he traveled to Spain and joined a left Marxist organization by the name of the POUM, the P-O-U-M, and fought fascists in the Spanish Civil War alongside anarchists and watched a social revolution take place. So Bobby has a unique insight in this because he is an American combat veteran, and this is your first time reading Homage to Catalonia, correct?
It is my first time reading Homage to Catalonia, actually. Yeah, I'm kicking myself that I didn't read it before. But
yeah, it's a brilliant book, and so many people do not know that Orwell was a socialist, and not only was he a socialist, he literally fought and killed fascists with a bunch of Marxists and said, if I had understood the situation better, I would have joined the anarchists. So,
that doesn't really fit with like the culture industry kind of appropriation and
of Orwell
as like the both sides are bad guy. Kind of.
Yeah, they reimagine Orwell as a centrist and as a supporter of capitalism and an anti-Stalinist.
Yeah.
When in fact the man wrote, like, people were like, how can you possibly say that Orwell was a socialist? I'm like, well, probably because he wrote an essay saying why I'm a socialist.
Oh, you're just misinterpreting it.
Yeah. So anyway, this is really exciting. So I haven't read Homage to Catalonia in years, but it's one of the most influential books on me. It's one of the major reasons why I'm an anarchist today. And constantly, while I was involved during Occupy Wall Street, I was remembering a lot of the stuff that Orwell talked about. And sometimes I would find, weird coincidences and history kind of repeating itself. Obviously, we weren't battling fascists in the street, except for, Bloomberg's thugs. But there were oftentimes like the way Orwell talks about media in this and the way he talks about leftists and the culture, like a lot of this struck a chord with me, years later. So I'm very interested to see, your reaction to chapter 2. And also for those of you who are not already subscribers to this channel, we just surpassed 1,000 subs. Last night I was streaming with American Johnson of the Non-Compete channel because he and I just finished a debate against David Friedman. That's David D. Friedman, who is Milton Friedman's son. And we argued left libertarianism versus right libertarianism. It went really, really well. David D. Friedman is and by the way, you owe me 1,000 likes and 1,000 alts.
Oh, did you actually call him by his LARPing name?
Yeah, Doc Carry a Doc. or Duke Carry a Doc.
I will get working on my sock accounts immediately after this. I will farm it out to the Russian bots. I didn't know that was Milton Friedman's son, but getting to this.
Wait a minute. How did you know him from SCA, but you didn't realize he was Milton Friedman's son?
Sometimes I don't put two and two together, man. Like sometimes it's got to be loud and slow. And, I figured there couldn't be two Friedmans that had that ideology without being too mean to a good doctor.
That's a good point. And you know, I will tell you, it's really funny because like me and like I used to LARP. I would still LARP if I had time for it. And like American Johnson was in the SCA too, and so like part of the time we were just like nerding out with him where he's talking about how like he's cutting gems for the SCA to make sure that people have like period accurate jewelry with real gems in them.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and he and his wife run a blog on medieval recipes. Like, yeah, it makes sense that you know an ANCAP wants to live in a feudal society.
Oh yeah, I think I pointed that out to you how ironic that is. But yeah, yeah, it is. What an agreeable man, though. I didn't know that about him. So that puts him at like peg 1 in my book.
I'd say honestly, I think he's probably the smartest ANCAP I've ever encountered.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was listening to that debate and I missed the part where you called him by his feudal name. I must have been doing something else. But
well, I kind of cheat because I asked him how to pronounce it first because I didn't want to mispronounce it. But yeah, we both had it right. It was Duke Caryadok.
But cool guy though.
Yeah, and Michael Humer, his partner, was late, but he came in later on, and that was interesting. He did have one moment in the debate that he was like, he just went peak full ANCAP, and I don't know if you heard it because I don't know how much of it you listened to, but he asked me and American Johnson if we were murderers.
Oh, jeez.
He's like, "Are you murder?"
Yeah. I did hear that.
You did? Okay, yeah. And that's like the classic anarcho-capitalist argument where they're like, "Are you murderers?" And you're like, I don't think I'm a murderer. What the fuck are you talking about? And they tried to say that we were drawing this just illustrates like the black and white thinking. They thought we were drawing a moral equivalency between failing to help someone and hurting someone. You know, and failing to help someone often is hurting someone, but it's not the same kind of moral thing as actually killing someone and murdering them. Both can be bad, but they can be different degrees and different categories of bad.
God, there's nothing worse than unearned pedantry. It's nothing worse than that.
Yeah. So the people have come for Homage to Catalonia. So let's dig into chapter 2 here. So Bobby, why don't we start with a summary of chapter 2? If people haven't read it, what happens in this chapter?
This is the chapter between Orwell's basic introduction to the POUM militia, which we talked about at length last time, and his transportation to the front and his very, very first impressions of what constitutes the front in this war. So this is actually a pretty short chapter, but it's like the rest of this book, it's extremely interesting. And the one cool thing that I'm noticing while reading this is that Orwell kind of strikes this very interesting balance between being a very good writer and being conversational. Mm-hmm. That's extremely rare, especially like around this period. He and Hemingway did it, I think, very well. Orwell is like much more British than Hemingway ever would be, but he avoids falling into that like kind of Faulkner trap of being unnecessarily verbose with his prose. And it's an absolute pleasure to read this. I did actually want to touch on something from chapter 1 that we didn't touch on last time. Sure,
let's talk about it.
He's getting on the train to leave for the front, and he's saying that his friend's wife gave him some sausage that tasted like soap and gave him the runs. I don't think that's like a thing, because he's saying like there's that sausage. I don't think that's like a normal thing, man. I think he's missing some things culturally, and maybe he shouldn't be eating that sausage. Yeah.
I've never heard of sausage that tasted like soap, and it's really funny because when I was younger, this is I didn't always put together, like I thought like the only time you suffered negative things from eating something was if you got like straight up food poisoning. And so like I remember for the longest time I had bought this ram's horn drinking stein in Iceland. And I would every couple of nights, I'd go out, I'd pour beer in it, I'd have it, I'd be like, yeah, I'm Jon Snow. Oh, this is amazing. And one of the things that I suddenly realized was that every night that I did this, I'd have like terrible gas. And I started calling it my fart horn, and I couldn't figure out why. And then like I went to a guy at like a Ren fair, and he was selling the horns. I'm like, yeah, so I got this horn. I got it from Iceland. And I'm just having this. And the guy's like, okay, so it's not made of, you think that the ram's horn is made of bone, but it's actually made of the same stuff that your hair is made out of. And when you drink out of it without it being sealed and put like wine or beer or whatever in it, even if you clean it, bacteria starts to lodge like within that horn. So you're actually like poisoning yourself every time you drink out of it. And I'm like, oh. And so like I bought one of his horns, and I actually sent him the horn that I had, and he fixed it, and it's no longer my fart horn.
Hey, sanitation actually winds up being something of a theme in this chapter, so that's pretty appropriate.
Yeah. Well, sanitation is very important in war. I like it. We had somebody, we had a viewer come in exactly when I first started talking about that, and then they just left.
Oh no,
talking about the fart horn.
Oh, that poor man. Oh. That poor man. I'm sorry.
He's just like, I'm in here for like radical book clubs. They're talking about farts and Ren fairs.
Bye, viewer.
Okay, so let's actually continue on with the book. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, they stop at a town, and something interesting happens that I kind of wanted to talk about. Is that he notices that like the culture has kind of gone from the town. It's been fought over 3 times and shelled all to hell. That's a natural result of warfare, and it's something I think a lot of people don't appreciate, is that economically, like, warfare is one of the most destructive things for any kind of society, and it's one of the reasons why you really don't want to have an armed revolution if you don't have to, because this town's been taken, but they had to fight over it 3 times, so it changed hands multiple times with the fascists, and the actual value of the town, other than its position, has been completely annihilated.
Because of all of the mortars going off and the various bombs, and
It's why Sun Tzu says the best victory is to win without fighting, because you take everything intact, and then you have the full economic potential of whatever you're taking, or you take prisoners and you don't have to lose troops fighting and killing people. It's a very important aspect of war that Orwell kind of notices without being explicit about it. But he also notices something interesting in the town, and he notices an old faded bullfighting poster. Do you remember this?
Vaguely, yeah. But
he notes flippantly that all the best matadors tend to be fascists. And I thought that was interesting because I just watched Jojo Rabbit recently.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I haven't seen that.
Great movie. And Taika Waititi, and I'm definitely mispronouncing that because I'm an ugly American, he really touches on something interesting about fascism. And it's that fascists love big, flashy entertainment.
Yes, they do. They are monster truck rally goers.
Mm-hmm. so it logically follows that the best bullfighters would be fascists, because Franco's forces would definitely fetishize the bullfight, because it's a tradition, Spanish tradition, uber alles, and it's also big flashy entertainment that they can give the people instead of actually improving their material conditions.
It's also exceptionally cruel. You know?
Oh, dude, it's gross. I saw one in Mexico. And oh my god, like I felt sick.
Yeah, I mean, at least with like the Mexican bullfights, there's the chance that the bull may actually gore and kill the matador. I was one of the things, like in Kyokushin karate, the guy who founded Kyokushin, like as a style, his name is Masoyama, and he was like literally like the crazy karate dude that like all of these kind of myths about like karate people go into the mountains and come out like hardened badasses after punching trees, like in the Rocky movie when Rocky is training in the snow, like he's playing off that Masoyama archetype. And Masoyama, after he came out of the mountains, like he literally shaved off one of his eyebrows so he couldn't come back. He was also hiding in the mountains because a lot of his friends had become kamikaze pilots during World War II. And so he spent a lot of time beating up American soldiers until there was a warrant out for his arrest.
Oh, Jesus.
So he went into the mountains of Japan and like built a shack himself and just trained karate by himself like every day for like 2 or 3 months, or it might have been longer than that actually. But when he came down from the mountains to popularize his new style, he fist fought bulls. Like, yeah, and there is you can look this up. There's footage on YouTube of like old grainy black and white footage of this incredibly buff, half Korean Japanese dude just wailing on bulls with his bare hands and killing them. And you're just like, wow, that's incredible. That's kind of fucked up. Because one thing is that you're thinking he's standing there and the bull's just over there and they're just going at it, but he's got like a ring or a rope around the bull's neck and he's able to pull it down and then punch it. But then also you're like, wait, but that's also a bull?
That's also a bull. Well, Roberto Duran knocked out a mule when he was like 15 in Panama.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so like
Probably one of the better things people have done with a mule in Panama.
Yeah, you're probably not wrong, which was a Spanish colony, but
Yeah.
we're getting
So Orwell notes that the best
Matador.
bullfighters are fascist, and that does make sense for fascism.
It does, because it's big flashy entertainment. Everyone can pretend like everything's great in town. They can distribute food and distract people from their material
Bread and circus.
Yeah, it's literally what it was designed for. He also notes that the walls of the city are also like peppered with gunfire from mass executions, which is again something that people don't really appreciate about warfare, especially civil warfare, is how messy it gets. Like, maybe a lot of those fascists deserve to be shot out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't there, and Orwell wasn't there either to tell us about it. But people don't appreciate that when it's domestic and when it's urban and when you're singling people out, there's going to be a lot of excess of violence. And you're walking through towns and you're seeing like bullet holes in the walls from just mass executions. That's not a desirable outcome, is what I'm trying to say. Is like the Spanish Civil War is important to study because it's a great case study in fighting fascism. It's a great case study in workers rising up against a blend of like an authoritarian and an ancient regime in Spain. And establishing
Franco was fighting not just in, I think Orwell does recognize, I think he says this at some point, Franco wasn't so much fighting to establish just fascism, but also to reassert a kind of feudalism, which was the latifundian system where manor lords controlled like essentially all the agricultural land.
Yeah, but it's inevitable that civil strife is going to leave very deep and lasting wounds, which is why it's not their first resort. And it isn't the first resort. We were talking about Clausewitz last time we did this show. And something that's very important from Clausewitz, if you take very little or nothing else from Clausewitz, you should take the fact that warfare is politics continued through violence. Mm-hmm. And the Spanish Civil War, we kind of drop in the middle of it, but this was like a decades-long process of politics and coalition building and dissatisfaction that's being continued through violence in this case. So
absolutely. I mean, this isn't even the first time fascists have taken over the country. There was the dictatorship of Primo de Rivera in like the 1920s before this. There was also like the first Spanish Republic that the fascists fought to overthrow. That was established when the King of Spain went to one of the generals and was like, "Hey, General so-and-so," because I can't remember his name, like, why won't we do this? These people are really mad at me. They don't want me to be the king anymore. So how about this? How about I give you all of the power and you become the dictator of Spain and you let me continue to be king. And, you just do everything and I'll keep being the king. And the guy he came to, and this was after Primo de Rivera, the guy was like, yeah, that sounds great. Okay, please give me all the power. All right, here, now we're a republic.
Yeah.
General Smedley Butler situation.
You kind of do. And like, imagine that those pathological politics became even more pathological and led to the situation that Orwell's in the middle of.
Yeah. And also what's very important to note here about the Spanish Civil War that a lot of people don't understand is that in a lot of ways, like we think of the Spaniards as like chill, fun, passionate Europeans, but like Spanish culture, particularly back then, was brutal. And it's like still brutal today. There's like I had a friend who traveled in Spain and they've got this like whole thing where there's a specific type of like Spanish greyhound that they will use the dogs for like hunting. And then they will string they don't want to feed the dogs through the winter, so they will string these dogs up by their feet and like torture them to death, essentially. Like it's really brutal and definite animal cruelty, and it still goes on in some of the less developed regions of Spain. So if they do that to dogs, just think what they might do to people who disagreed with them, particularly in the middle of like a brutal civil war.
Yeah, and actually, that kind of does bring me to a little bit of something that I wanted to talk about. Was he notes specifically that every town they're going through, the agriculture is all still basically powered by mules. Yeah. And like there aren't a lot of trucks. His truck actually gets lost and he has to walk, which is hilarious. But he's losing his British aristocratic values very, very quickly over the course of this story. Before this, he actually sleeps in chaff, and he notes like chaff is better than hay. So he's gone from complaining about having to do a birdie sip out of wine in the last chapter to not really minding sleeping in chaff. But what he notes there is something that a lot of people don't understand about this era. a lot of people that I talk to about history, especially of this era, assume that everything was basically motorized in the world at this point. It really wasn't. The U.S. Army, even during World War II, which is a couple years later after this, was still using horses for a lot of things. The German army was mostly powered by horses during the Blitzkrieg. Spanish agriculture and whatnot is still mostly not motorized. We're coming out of the very early industrial era, but some parts of the world are still kind of a world only lit by fire in this case.
And the Spaniards are still using horses in their military. In my film in my screenplay that I wrote for DeRudy, which we will hopefully find a way to make it like, I actually show that. And even if you watch the film The Spanish Earth by Hemingway, which
I have actually seen that.
It's a wonderful propaganda film that tried to get the Americans in on the Spaniard side. It's free on YouTube. You can just look it up. The Spanish Earth, like, you can see people like yoked, like pulling the plows themselves like they're a beast of burden when there isn't a donkey around to do it.
Yeah. So there's material immiseration in these towns that is on a level that we're unfamiliar with in the first world today.
Yeah. And there's also a seething class hatred between the upper class and the lower class. And like, if you read Spain in Our Hearts by Adam Hochschild, there is actually a point where he's talking about, because a bunch of Americans came over as part of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade to fight against the fascists during the same war. And a couple of them were black women who serving as nurses from like the antebellum, or it's definitely not antebellum, the Jim Crow South. Yeah. And they literally said they comparing the treatment of the Spanish peasantry by the Spanish aristocrats and upper class and the way they talked about them and the way these women literally went on the record of saying, I have never, ever seen anyone treated this bad who was the same race as the ruling class. Like, they literally talked about the Spaniards as if they were like the lower class Spaniards, as if they were vermin.
Yeah, and that's something that's very interesting, because in media a lot of the times the class hatred only goes up. But it's important to remember it kind of went both ways, because especially the landed gentry and the capitalist class, such as it was in Spain at this point, really did look down on and hate the actual proletariat workers in this case. Yeah. And they controlled the system, and they designed the system in such a way as to repress them instead of building consent. And when you're talking about political theory, when you're talking about building new societies, when you're talking about improving things, you really, 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 really want to build a society based on consent. Because if you don't have the consent of the people in society, you have to have something to use against them, which is what we see Franco doing when he took the army of Morocco, which was trying to repress a rebellion in Morocco and start to try to seize power in Spain.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, that's sort of like how fascism happens. It's colonial practices that have been used outside of the country rebounding on the people inside the country. And Franco, this is outside the scope of this chapter. Yeah. But when he brought the Moors back, they used rape and the fear of rape as a weapon of terror against the Republicans. In fact, I think on the sides of barns and stuff was painted stuff like "Your women will give birth to fascists." They would use rape by Moors as a weapon and as a weapon of terror. And when they took a town, when Franco's fascists took one town, they actually stripped all the women naked, probably raped them, murdered them, threw their bodies down the town well, and then paraded around with women's undergarments on their bayonets. These people are monsters. It's really important to understand, the Spanish upper class, I may have mentioned this last episode, literally hunted humans for sport. It was called Reforma Agraria, and they would, the sons of wealthy landowners, it was a fox hunt, would literally get on their horses, run down a peasant that they didn't like, who was being too uppity, murder them and dump them in a shallow grave. And there's your Reforma Agraria. There's the little patch of land you wanted. So the performative cruelty of fascism, this is what Orwell is here fighting against, and he hasn't encountered that yet, and I don't think he encounters that kind of a massacre in the book, but you will find it in other stuff, like, for instance, Spain in Our Hearts, or if you read the work of Abel Paz, he talks a little bit about this. But what's always been fascinating to me is that, like, as a culture, we focus solely on like the red terror, and we don't recognize the white terror, even though it was way worse. Like, I mean, even you play Street Fighter, and the character
Zangief.
No, not Zangief. The Vega.
The bullfighter.
Originally Balrog, the bullfighter, who is definitely would be a fascist.
Oh, absolutely.
He has a special attack called Red Terror, not White Terror. So, you can just see that sort of blind spot that our culture seems to have gotten for this. But let's not get too far afield from the chapter. Yeah. So Orwell is going through the countryside, and he is encountering he's encountering essentially the deprivation of war and of the Spanish Republic. What happens next?
Yeah, he comes along a town, and I have to touch on this because this is actually my hard limit and would have messed me up, is he finds a town that's basically using open fields and a church as latrines. And I know I've touched on it already, but this is kind of the breakdown of society at war, because one of the first things you do as a society is you kind of decide where people go to the bathroom. You don't poop in the river, you don't poop in the church where everybody meets, you don't poop in the fields. You don't want to actually use human excrement as fertilizer. I don't know if anyone in the crowd is particularly agriculturally inclined, but it's not good for you.
It's a particularly scatological episode.
It really is. I'm sorry, guys, but that's what he's touching on. And like he actually says that his first impression of war, his first memories will always be like marching along fields that are just full of it and like stepping in it. I'm just like, oh. And like for me, like I can handle a lot of bad stuff, but human excrement, that's my line, man. Like I would not be okay with that. And the disorganization kind of continues because it's 2 days before they're actually issued their firearms.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of doesn't understand issuing firearms to a militia or a military unit versus issuing firearms to like a marksman or a target shooter, because the training that he would have gotten as basically a colonial gendarme when he was a British policeman in Burma, it focuses a lot on marksmanship, and the U.S. Army focuses on marksmanship and conditioning you to shoot at a man-sized target. But he gets a Mauser that's dated from 1896, so that would have been a Mauser 1893, which the Spanish ironically bought to put down a revolution in Morocco. Now it's being used by a workers' militia. I thought that was very interesting. But that's a first-generation smokeless powder rifle. And that rifle is actually not designed to take what would have been contemporary cartridges, which we're going to see in a couple minutes coming up in this chapter. It's also not really designed to be like a pinpoint accuracy rifle. Military rifles, you're not really meant to shoot somebody like in the eye from 1,000 meters.
Right.
They're meant to shoot, the military jargon would be a minute of man. So you measure accuracy in minute of angle, which is basically how close together you can group your shots. But military rifles, it's more minute of man. It's more about hitting a man-sized target at a certain distance. And this rifle particularly, if you look at the sights on it, if you're looking it up on Google, the sights actually go out to about 2,000 meters, which is wishful thinking at best. But it was designed for an era where people still marched in close formation, and you could volley fire at a packed formation of people. So Orwell's noting that it's not a good rifle, the barrel's caked in carbon, but it's still good enough for what he's going to do with it. We're going to see that in a couple of minutes. But they have no rifle training. They don't know how to actually assemble and disassemble their guns, which is really, really dangerous. We're going to see why in a few minutes. And they only get 50 rounds. That is not a lot of bullets. It sounds like a lot of bullets to people who aren't in the gun culture, but 50 rounds goes real, real fast.
Yeah,
especially in a gunfight.
Yeah, and especially if it's essentially trench warfare in the mountains.
Yeah, exactly. He says that the best rifle actually goes to a guy they call the Maricone, which he says means Nancy boy.
Marcone or Maricone. Yeah, it essentially means pussy or.
I was like, Nancy boy isn't really an accurate translation.
That's that's one of the things that keeps coming up. One of the things when I was writing No Gods, No Kings and Durruti that I kind of realized was that there's a Spanish obscenities are really, really interesting, both with like the direct translation of them and then like how they attack people, like what they go after.
It's a very machismo oriented culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting too. It's a very deep and interesting culture. I'm not criticizing it, but it is very machismo. And to go to your point about animal abuse earlier, they actually brand POUM on an innocent little dog.
Oh, I remember that. I was sitting there. I'm like, I'm 100% on their side. Why are you branding a dog? What the hell's wrong with you?
I was going John Wick mode as I was reading that. I was like, okay, maybe Franco's not all bad.
Trust me, if they just branded poom on a dog, I don't want to think about what Franco did to dogs.
Yeah, I mean, Hitler had a pet dog. He was nice to dogs, but
that's actually a myth. Hitler did have pet dogs. Yes, Hitler. So Hitler actually would go around with a hippo skin bullwhip and would like randomly attack dogs to try to impress women with it.
Wow.
So no, Hitler did not love dogs. Hitler may have loved his dogs and been photographed with them, but he was known for cruelty to animals. Like,
wow. Yeah, I didn't think I could like Hitler less, and yet I do.
Oh, dude, there's a great, if you listen to Robert Evans' Behind the Bastards, they do they do a deep dive on like Hitler's sex life, and
I'm good without knowing that one.
Good without knowing, but like, he is almost like, seriously, if Hitler were alive today, he would be like a Reddit incel.
Well, he'd probably be a Breitbart writer, but moving on, there's an interesting story, and you probably remember this, even though your gargoyle ate your copy of Catalonia, of the fascist deserters that they get in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually get to criticize Franco at this point.
Great. Let's hear the fascist deserters.
Because I went a little hard on the POUM in the last chapter, but the difference between the POUM and the fascists is really highlighted pretty well in this chapter. They get a group of fascist deserters in town, and they're feeding them soup. And Orwell goes out of his way to say that there's a Spanish partisan patting one of the fascists on the back and making reassuring sounds. So I'm just, I
remember this.
Yeah, I'm just picturing him like cooing to this poor little guy, and it highlights the difference. And it's something that I praised the POUM militia for in the last chapter, between having highly ideologically motivated troops who will endure deprivation and lack of supplies and disorganization for an ideological goal, and having a conscript army.
Yeah, which is what Franco had.
Exactly, because your conscripts are guys that aren't going to really be too motivated to fight because they're forced to fight. They're not going to be too motivated to like hurt their neighbors because they're the same culture. They might even know some of these people. They're not going to be too enthusiastic about accepting training, because while the POUM's training wasn't the best, the militiamen were all very enthusiastic about getting whatever training they were. In the last chapter, Orwell fetishized getting a machine gun and really wanted to learn how to use that thing.
But both him and Hemingway were really they just wanted to fire a machine gun.
In their defense, shooting a machine gun is super fun.
Right. If you say to yourself, as you said the previous, instead of die, motherfucker, die,
have a piece of apple pie. Yeah.
Have a piece of apple pie.
That's like my favorite thing. And it's interesting because we see that like the POUM guys and the left guys are materially kind of deprived in this war, while the fascists might be a little bit materially better off, but they have less motivated soldiers. So it kind of shows you how key like the international intervention was on both sides, in the material way for the left militias and the left military units, and in actually getting like motivated troops for the fascists, and having such an overwhelming material advantage in weaponry towards the end of the Spanish Civil War that they kind of crushed the left opposition.
Yeah, and this is really interesting actually, because I've gone and really looked into this period very deeply, which was great, which helped me in my debate against David Friedman. He was flipping out because I had such a deep knowledge of history, and he tried to like, I guess he kind of had to maintain his position. He sort of had to deny the validity of history to a certain extent, like the concept of it. But like one of the things that I've looked at was like, how could the Spanish left have won? And really looking at assuming nothing else changed, the liberals still would not equip them. The Soviets still would not equip them. They only were working with what they had. Really, the only way they could have beaten the fascists, I think, is if they had adopted essentially a blitzkrieg style of revolution. If instead of the slogan had been no passaran, if the slogan had been adelante, they might have been able to do it. It would have been a huge, crazy risk. And if you put me in that position and like, I'm the guy, I don't know what's going to happen, I would have been like, well, let's be more moderate. Let's wait and see what happens. But knowing the future, the only way that the Spanish Republic could have won is if the anarchists had taken total control and immediately advanced on the South, taken Madrid, and grabbed the war industry in the South, because essentially they had the breadbasket of Spain, and they also had the manufacturing, which allowed them to build their own like cobbled together armored vehicles and whatnot. What they did not have was they did not have war industry. The only weapons they had were that had been squirreled away from previous revolts, and that they had gotten when raiding the barracks in Barcelona, and what they took from captured fascist soldiers. So Franco had all the weapons, but he didn't have any way. But he did not have dedicated soldiers, and he did not have a way to actually fuel his war industry. And in fact, without the CEO of Texaco essentially giving him all the oil he needed on credit, because he also didn't have any money. All of Spain's money was in the Bank of Spain in Madrid, and it took him forever to take Madrid. And by the time he did, Stalin took it all. But like literally, if the revolution had gone and moved through that country like fire, they wouldn't have even had to take the whole country, but just enough of the South to where they got their own war industry and had the ability to create weapons. I think that would have made a big difference. The other thing that would have made a big difference is if they had been able to reach out to the Moors who were serving under Franco and get them to betray him, because the Moors were horribly abused by the fascists, and Spanish Morocco would have been sympathetic to the revolutionary cause if racism had not prevented them from recognizing this.
Yeah, and you know that is a very good analysis, and I think we kind of ran into this in the last chapter too. When you're dealing with military science, one of the key things that you can take away from, and I really highly encourage anyone who's listening to this to actually pick up and read Karl von Clausewitz's On War, which I'm going to read a quote from in a minute. One of the things that you have to kind of realize is that counterfactual questions aren't as productive as they could be, because it's better to learn from what did happen. And in this case, you're right, they didn't have a war industry, which was a key thing. But like you can kind of like go to the extreme with counterfactuals. Like, what if they had dragons, or what if they had an F-35, you know? But it's better to learn from the lessons from what did happen. And you're touching on that really well in that analysis, in that they didn't have war industry. They didn't have access to international capital, and they didn't have like the support, the consistent support of another superpower that could aid them.
Yeah, whereas Franco had the support of two superpowers.
Yeah,
and technically the tacit support of a third, because the U.S. government, while it officially had a position of non-intervention, and it was actually against the law for Texaco to supply Franco with this credit, they just let it happen. Like the guy who did it got called to Washington for like a meeting, like bad boy, and then no consequences whatsoever, and he just continued to do it.
An oil company doing something bad, you know?
No. Yeah.
But
I'm sorry. Let's continue. Let's stay in the chapter.
Yeah, he's super smart in that he starts to worry about the conditions that are going to be on the front more than the bullets, because he remembers stories about the Great War. It's really, really, really smart to condition your soldiers to deal with conditions and supply them to deal with rough conditions, because he's worried about the cold. He's worried about getting like trench foot, and he's worried about this for a very good reason. If you look at military history, disease and deprivation kill more soldiers in history than bullets do. The American Civil War, I think the ratio was something like 2-to-1 bullets to disease, and that was only like 80 years before that, something like that.
Yeah. Wow. It's weird when you put things together like that. It was like when I first moved to New York, I would take the subway, and it'd be like getting out of the subway, you'd feel like every subway exit you were in a different country.
Yeah.
And then, like, I started at one point biking to work and riding from Harlem all the way down to like the Flatiron district, and like you're just like, oh, that connects to that. And in much the same way that you're like, oh, that was really only 80 years beforehand?
I mean, 1865 to what? Are we in like 1930?
1936.
36? Yeah. So what, 36 minus 45? So yeah, about that.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, and that makes sense that...
Wow. I mean, and even if you go back to like 1917, 1918, the Spanish flu was devastating to soldiers.
Yeah.
I mean, it killed thousands and thousands of people. Not more than the trench warfare did, but
absolutely. Fun fact about the Spanish flu, guys.
Yeah.
The first thing is that the Spanish flu probably started in Kansas.
Yeah, at Fort Riley.
And the reason why it's called the Spanish flu is it struck during World War I, and all the other countries were involved in World War I were getting devastated by it, but they all kept it secret as a state secret. Spain stayed out of World War I, which was why it was so rich and had so much gold in the Bank of Spain. But also, because they weren't at war, their press was the only press that reported on it, and thus it became the Spanish flu. The other interesting thing is that, like now with coronavirus, doctors advised, particularly in Spain, essentially social distancing to deal with it. And the church in Spain was like, no, fuck that. And continued to have religious festivals, continued to spread the disease and get as many people as possible killed. And you've seen this pattern with regard to disease and religion and conservative thinking, like repeat and repeat and repeat. For instance, even in during the time of the Black Plague, people would come through a town thinking that the Black Plague was the judgment of God, and these penitents would be whipping themselves to try to, make God feel better and get rid of the Black Plague. And people in the town would run up and soak up their blood in cloths and then immediately put it on their face. Yeah. It's like a means of keeping the plague at bay, which obviously only spread the plague.
The more of this I see, the more I kind of sympathize with Napoleon in the early 1800s going through Spain trying to break the power of the church. Even though Napoleon, not a great guy, but
yeah, this is also, by the way, something people should keep in mind with regard to the church, because you start talking about the Spanish Civil War, like the first thing they'll say is like, "Oh my God, they killed priests and nuns." So first off, yes, they did. Yeah. But here's the thing: the church was an official combatant. Like the Spanish the church was incredibly corrupt, and also both sides killed monks and nuns and priests. There were priests that sided with the Republic, and Franco's men tortured them to death and raped the nuns and did all the rest of that. So the church was split in this situation. But you can actually go back and you can find photographs of nuns and priests in the Spanish Civil War, armed, Sieg Heiling, and all that stuff. So this was for instance, Buenaventura Durruti, one of my personal heroes. He helped to murder the Bishop of Zaragoza, which was a reprisal killing for the killing of another Union leader. And this particular bishop was an intensely evil man, beyond running prostitutes and arranging for assassinations. Like the Spanish church, like the Spaniards themselves, really ran the gamut in terms of human emotion and human cruelty. And there's a famous phrase, the Spanish follow their priests either with a candle or a club. And so this culture has gone on for quite some time. So the anti-clericalism of Spain, while it looks really bad out of context, in context was completely inevitable.
Yeah, well, it's what I was saying earlier. Pathological political situations result in pathological political outcomes. Mm-hmm. So, the trick is to kind of try to avoid that at all costs. But as he's marching to the front too, he actually is really nervous because the kids have this kind of masculine fantasy of war that he kind of has a little bit too, Orwell, where it's going to be this glorious, quick little affair where
they kill some fascists and they're home for lunch.
Yeah, they're gonna storm the.
Bobby, I think we just lost Bobby. Let me see if I can contact him. I've got 5 people in the chat now, it looks like. So while I figure out what the hell's going on and where Bobby went, hey, where did you go? if you guys are interested in anything here, if you got a comment or a question while I wait for him to come back, just fire it on into the comments and I will answer it for you. Otherwise, I'm going to keep talking about Spanish history while we wait for Bobby. And in fact, let me grab my copy of Derudi here. I'm just going to have to move the gargoyle. Sorry, buddy. So, is that Bobby? Is he back? Let me see if I can let him back in to stream.
I got booted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. You're back. You just ruined everything.
I'm a horrible human being. I'm sorry about that, but he's nervous too. And I wanted to read a Clausewitz quote from On War about the novices entering the battlefield, and I just canceled it out because I am a boomer and I'm apparently very bad at technology.
Oh, I'm guessing when you were trying to pull up that quote, that's how you got yourself kicked out.
No, well, I canceled out the window by mistake instead of opening my favorites because I'm a moron, and I apologize to everybody who's listening. But I'll read this quote, and it's very informative about kind of going to war. And here it goes. It's, let us accompany a novice to the battlefield. As we approach, the rumble of guns grows louder and alternates with the whir of cannonballs, which attract his attention. Shots begin to strike close around us. We hurry up the slope where the commanding general is stationed. Here cannonballs and bursting shells are frequent, and life begins to seem more serious than the young man had imagined. Now we enter the battle raging before us, still almost like a spectacle, and join the nearest divisional commander. A noise is heard that is a certain indication of increasing danger. The rattling of grape shot on roofs and on the ground. And if you don't know what grape shot is, basically people would put big giant metal ball bearings in cannons, and they would fire them as anti-personnel rounds at people. So it's turning a giant cannon into a shotgun, essentially.
Gross.
We still use that today.
Oh, yeah.
It's super effective. Cannonballs tear past, whizzing in all directions, and the musket balls begin to whistle around us. The air is filled with hissing bullets and that sound like a sharp crack if they pass close to one's head, which is true, and it's terrifying. For a final shock, the sign of men being killed and mutilated moves our pounding hearts to awe and pity. So yeah, it's terrifying going to war, and Orwell kind of touches on that he's scared, but the kids kind of have this masculine fantasy of a quick and glorious war, but it's not really going to be like that. And it's not going to be quite like Clausewitz describes for Orwell, because as he gets to the front, he's stationed at a very boring part of the front. And I hate to kind of shatter people's image of warfare, but that's really what war is like. It's a lot of waiting around followed by quick punctuations of absolute horror.
Yeah. Well, what is it? The military phrase is "hurry up and wait."
Hurry up and wait, and that's what Orwell's kind of doing in this chapter. Is he's hurrying up to the front to wait, and that's something that you kind of really have to remember about the reality of warfare, especially as he's getting to the front. Where, by the way, they still don't have adequate sanitation. And I won't go into too much more graphic scatological detail in this chapter, but those guys would not fly in most modern trained armies, because that's your number one way that you're going to actually transmit disease, and the number one way in which you're going to have kind of disorganization and lack of discipline. But
now, if I recall in this chapter, by the way, he talks about the cold, because they're fighting in the mountains.
Yeah. Yeah, he is, and that's the number one thing he's actually afraid of as he's going to the front, is the cold and getting like trench foot or something. And warfare, a lot of the times, is just dealing with like hardship and annoying circumstances, especially for modern people in the first world, where we go to like Iraq or Afghanistan. Well, the U.S. Army has a lot of creature comforts on our bases. You're still living in kind of materially mistreated circumstances, and it's difficult, and it requires training and discipline and ideological commitment to kind of get over that, which is an advantage of the POUM over the fascists, who have a conscript army instead of an ideologically motivated army.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Interestingly enough, surprisingly, that strikes a chord with me in the fact that, I'm an Appalachian Trail 2,000 miler.
I thought it would.
Yeah, and a lot of people, because like, when you're on the AT, you're dealing with that as well. It rains on you, you just keep going. Because like we used to joke about it's no use knowing the weather if you're not going to change your plans.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like, I still got 20 miles to go. Oh shit, it's going to rain on me for the next month.
Yeah. In the army, we have a phrase where if it's not raining, we're not training.
And there's well, and also the guy who first through hiked the Appalachian Trail, Maine to Georgia, was a military veteran from World War II. That was Earl Schaefer. And he had originally intended to do it in its entirety with a friend, but his friend died in World War II, and so he wound up doing it on his own. Yeah. Now, as an aside, by the way, if you ever read his book, Walking with Spring, which is beautiful, I highly recommend it. He kind of has almost like the way he talks about himself and about what he's doing. It very much has a Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. Like if Calvin is doing like the spaceman spiff or kind of Yukon Ho thing where he's talking about himself in like the third person and stuff like, yeah, that's how Earl Schaefer like approached hiking. And I wonder, I'm guessing the military training makes that kind of deprivation easier because you're already used to
it. Yeah, it very much does, and it's a long tradition in Western militaries. It goes all the way back to the Romans. They actually used to criticize the original Roman legionaries when Marius reformed the Roman legions into a professional force. They introduced the mandatory ruck march. They're the equivalent. And they used to call the legionaries Marius's mules because they would have to carry like 40 pounds of stuff basically on a long ruck march. And we still do that today. If you go to basic training in any of the combat-oriented branches of the military, which would be the Marine Corps or the Army, you're going to have to do like at least a 12-mile ruck with like a 45 to 55-pound rucksack on you. Yeah. Which is not easy.
No, it's not. I mean, my pack started out at 40 pounds. I cut it down. By the way, we've got a guy in the chat, Munda, who's saying he's going to get to Homage to Catalonia eventually. He's heard really good things. I hope it's a he, might be a they. And Chomsky's favorite book by Orwell, by the way. I agree. It's also my favorite book by Orwell, to tell you the truth.
It's rapidly becoming that for me.
Yeah, what I like about Orwell's writing in Homage to Catalonia is he breaks it down, and he's got a very nice mix of being hopeful and also critical. Yeah, and that's very rare because, well, I don't know. Let's keep going. So he's in the mountains. He's dealing with the cold.
He meets a Belgian Polish Jew who speaks French as his first language, who's their officer. Which again, it's something really important about the POUM militias. Is that they have these international troops that are highly ideologically motivated. And he has a kid. I'm sorry, I'm trying to light a smoke as I'm talking, and it's really humid out here. He has a kid. Oh, just 1 second. I'm sorry. Could you carry this?
No, it's fine. Munda, he's lighting his cigar because he's trying to kill himself slowly. Munda said that I did not misgender him. He is correct. Okay, good. I'm glad I got that. The POUM had a lot of international troops, and what's really interesting, and I think they get to it in this chapter, maybe they don't. It might be chapter 3, but like there's specifically like German shock troopers that they have that are really good and really. The rest of the POUM are kind of like in awe of them.
I think that's chapter 4, but something important happens here that relates to logistics, which we talked about in chapter 1, is that when they first get there, one of the kids in his militia unit fires his rifle off and it blows up in his face. And
I remember this.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I figured out exactly what happened is that they're using older like 1893 Mausers that are chambered for 7mm Mauser, but they're chambered for a lighter load of powder because that was one of the first smokeless powder weapons, and smokeless powder detonates at a higher velocity than old black powder. And they were still loading him light, but he probably had a modern round in there, and that's what caused the rifle to explode. So that's kind of why logistics is so important in warfare, because you have to get your guys the right ammo for their guns. And it's why uniformity of armament is super important, and Orwell touches on this a lot. He also tries to take a shot at a guy from about 700 meters away. With open iron sights on a rifle like he's using, that is like completely wishful thinking. And he's angry because he kind of doesn't have a rifle that'll actually hit that at that distance. But that's what I was going back to a minute ago with his philosophy of marksmanship. The U.S. Army did a study in the 60s, which resulted in an insane thing called the Salvo Project. But they found that accuracy mechanically with a rifle, and even the accuracy of the soldier, wasn't as much of a factor in actually hitting somebody as exposure.
Right.
So at that distance of 700 meters with two guys in trenches, you're probably not going to hit anything, even if you have the best rifle in the world.
Yeah, unless you're like a sniper, and even then
it's exposure.
Yeah, you're talking about exposure as in how
long the guy is exposed to your fire.
Okay. So he sees a guy's head pop up. He takes a pop shot at him, and he's pissed about the rifle. But yeah, he probably 700 meters. He probably would not have managed that hit. Now, give us the topography here so we can picture this. If I'm recalling, it's like they have a hill, and then the fascists have a hill on the other side.
Yeah, exactly correct. He goes up to a hill, and their position is they have a few guys at the kind of as the hill starts to crest as sentries, followed by barbed wire, followed by the actual position on the top of the hill, and then the hill crests downward. And on the reverse side, you have a valley, and then you have another hill with the actual fascists on top. And Orwell is actually really angry about this because he's picturing two trenches like 50, 60 meters apart where you're constantly throwing grenades at each other and fighting. And the reality of warfare of position, which if you don't want to read Clausewitz because it's too thick, Mao actually wrote a handbook on guerrilla warfare where he talked about this. And you can pick that up. I actually bought mine at a U.S. Army post exchange a couple of years ago because it's an interesting and a very important book about warfare. But the reality of position warfare like this is that it's static and it's super boring.
Yeah, it's basically we're going to hang out on this hill and they can't come after us because we're on the hill, and we can't go after them because they're on the hill.
Exactly.
So we're just going to sit here and stare at each other with our thumbs up our asses.
Yeah, basically. And if you go into that valley, you're going to get shot, like point blank and period. Like that valley is going to be like 200 or 300 meters in front of him, and at that point, you're definitely in range of the Mausers that both sides are using, or machine guns, which actually happens in chapter 3. He starts talking about that. But something I really, really wanted to touch on is that Orwell, after he sees this, decides that he's not going to duck into the trench, which, for the reasons that we just discussed, hitting somebody is a function of how long they're actually exposed to your fire.
Right.
Really, really, really bad idea. And he actually almost gets shot. He has a bullet like hit right near him, and he ducks, and he's angry at himself for ducking. And I wrote this down. Everybody ducks. Getting shot at. I don't care if you're like a Delta Force operator. I don't care if you're a Green Beret. I don't care if you're Marine MARSOC. If you get shot at, it's a terrifying experience because you realize that a guy is trying to kill you with a bullet.
Yeah,
which is horrifying. And he ducks, and he's angry at himself. If I could go back in time, I would talk to him about this. You shouldn't have been angry at yourself, George, because everybody ducks, no matter how well trained you are. And that's another reality of warfare, is that it is a horrifying experience because most likely, if you're living in any kind of country, nobody's tried to kill you in your life. And you've never tried to kill anyone because most of everybody's social conditioning is to avoid killing people.
Yeah.
And the first time somebody actually tries to kill you directly, it is a horrifying experience.
Yeah, I can, because you just kind of, there's the abstract idea of someone shooting at me, and then there's the idea that, oh my God, my life might actually end here.
Yes.
And there is some force, some unknown force out there that could and would end it. It almost makes me think of the time. So when I used to have this long drive between when I was going to college. Occasionally I would go home, and it was a 2.5 hour drive between my parents' house at the time and where I was going to college. And this was in Kentucky, and there's no roadways, like there's no side of the road in Kentucky when you're on the highways. So there's nowhere to pull off. It's just the road. And I was, I think, fiddling with something. I was either trying to check a text message or change a CD in the car. And I looked up, and I realized that in front of me, the car had stopped dead. And I looked into the other lane, and I could see a car coming at me with its headlights on. And I realized in that moment that I had two choices. I could slam on the brakes, in which case I would careen and crash my car into the back of this other car that had stopped. Or I could take a risk and pull into the other lane. And I took a risk. And I pulled into the other lane, shot around this car, the stalled or stopped car as quickly as I could, and got back into the other, and literally came within maybe a foot's distance of crashing headlong into the other car. Again, no shoulder, no other option.
Oh, geez.
And I got to the end, I got out of it, without nary a scratch on me. But I just remember like the adrenaline hits me and what has just happened hit me. And I called my dad and I told my dad, I was like, Dad, so I don't know if I just died or not, and I'm just having a hallucination here. Tell me something that I would never imagine you might tell me, so that I know I'm still alive. And my dad was like, well, okay, I just got finished paying this bill for you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely still alive. Okay.
That's a very theater kid thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I almost got shot actually before I came into the military by accident once, but
this was wait before you came in, because there were people in the last one, and we need to have you answer this before the end of this stream, is when your buddy shot at you. But this is another time you almost got shot. Let's hear this first one first.
Yeah, I was on a deer trail actually in Florida here, and I was walking with my friend, and all of a sudden there's a terrifying zip pop, and this tree starts to explode, and I ate dirt, and it turned out, long story short, so I can get to the other one, which is actually more interesting, that these two guys were in the woods shooting towards a game trail at a target of Osama bin Laden with two like Beretta handguns, and they were just popping 9mm into the woods. It was not a good day. But the guy who almost shot me in basic training, he almost shot me twice. Actually, this kid was not a.
Was this the kid who threw the pin and held the grenade?
Yes, this is the same kid. And I totally sympathize with Orwell with these untrained kids because of these incidents. But the first time we were on a zero range, so imagine like a firing line of people with M16 rifles that are shooting at targets to zero in their sights, because you have to adjust sights to you so it's dead on. And he's talking to somebody next to him, and he's got his rifle, because he's looking over his right shoulder. He's got his rifle angled at a 90-degree angle down the firing range. And he squeezes the trigger, and all of a sudden there's a zip pop right in front of me where the 5.56 round landed. And I'm like, did somebody just shoot at me? And I looked down the range, and the drill sergeant had actually picked this kid up by the handle in the back of his body armor and taken his rifle from him. And the second time he almost shot me, we were on the Buddy live fire range, which if you've ever seen the movie Heat, you'll understand this. You have to do a fire in advance in a pair. So one guy runs forward while the other guy's covering him and suppressing the enemy fire. And then the other guy gets set, and then he covers the other guys he's running. So I'm running forward, and he misses his target. And it was raining that day, so I know that the round came close enough for me to feel the rain that he displaced with the bullet hit my face.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
by the way, we have a thing from the chat from Munda to you. It says, bro, you're a true artist. It's badass. LMAO. I was taught to be left brain all my life, so it's good to know comrades like you are out there. 100.
Yeah, man. And like, I'm a very left brain person myself, but at the same time, that doesn't preclude you from doing like right brain things. It doesn't preclude you from getting out there and doing physical stuff. It doesn't preclude you from participating in all kinds of other activities. And I highly encourage you guys to get out there and do something to like engage that right side of your brain. This last 2 weeks, I've been actually fixing a bulldozer. And at the same time, I've been reading Deleuze for like the 5th time, trying to actually understand it. So it's not impossible.
Good luck with that shit.
Oh, dude, this is like the 5th time. It's Sisyphus rolling a rock up a hill. But yeah, that dude definitely almost killed me a couple times.
Oh man, that's crazy. Yeah, I have never been shot at. I've mentioned this in some other streams. I was mugged and beaten in the face with a pistol by two guys.
Well, that's terrifying.
Yeah. And it was really funny, actually, because I brought this up with Augustus Sol Invictus when Caleb Maupin was debating him in New York. I was there.
Wait. There's a dude whose name is Augustus Sol Invictus.
Yes, he's in prison right now, I think. He's a literal blood drinking fascist who ran as the libertarian candidate in Florida. So like,
oh wait,
yeah. When I heard about him, I was like, oh man, Florida man used to be like so whimsical.
wait, is he the one? Because I think he's near me. Because we've had two. Is he the one who went to jail for sexual assault, or is he the one who got outed for Vampire the Masquerade like rape?
I don't know if it's either of those. He went to jail for beating his wife, I think, actually.
Oh, okay. We've got a lot of here.
There's a lot of crazy people. Florida man is going off the deep end like everything else in 2020.
Yeah.
But and by the way, on this whole thing is allegedly. We are not stating facts about Augusta Sol Invictus. We like just this is our impression. So what we had going on essentially was I had gone out to my girlfriend's car to get a copy of Equilibrium.
A great movie. I love it.
Yeah, terrific movie. And it had fallen between the seats and I couldn't find it. So I'm digging in the car, trying to find it. And it's the sun is set. And these two guys come out, two black guys, incidental detail, but still there. Yeah. And they were wearing hoods and stuff. And I'm digging in my car. And now this is in like Lexington, Kentucky, next to a white picket fence by an apartment complex. This is not in the ghetto or anything like that. I was across the street from a freaking Walmart. And they came around the corner and one of them pulled something out of their pocket and ran at me. Now, I had a friend who was African-American and had a jacket with a hood that looked very much like it. So I'm like, wait a minute, is this my friend messing with me? And he comes running around the edge of the car and just bang, hits me in the face. And I'm like, what? I'd done a lot of martial arts at this point. He hit me again and he hit me again. So like 3 times, hadn't said a word to me. And I thought to myself, like, okay, this guy's hit me 3 times and I'm not down. Time to hit him back. I'm about a head and a half taller than this dude. Yeah. So I get up and I curl my hand into a fist. I'm getting ready to fight back. And then my eye catches and I look down and I realize, oh shit, that's a gun. New plan.
Yeah. If you look carefully, if somebody's pointing a gun at you and the light is just right, you can actually kind of sort of see the bullet in the barrel.
I think, was it you who brought that up? No, a friend of mine had a fascist pull a gun on him and he did see the bullet in the barrel. Yeah.
It's a terrifying thing.
Yeah. And he actually, he talked the fascist, and both times we both had this experience because, spoiler, I talked these guys down. So they raked I always tell this story, by the way, whenever anybody's like, the only way to be safe is to have a gun. Because if I'd had a gun, it either wouldn't have worked or it would have made the situation worse. Yeah. And because they already had the gun drawn on me and everything, and I wasn't expecting it. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, can't fight this guy. New plan. And I just start yelling at him. And I basically yell at him and like, what the fuck is your problem, asshole? What the hell? Like appealing to him on a human level. And they didn't expect this and they kind of took a step back. And at that point, that was when they started asking me for money and give me the money. And they're hitting me. Now here's the thing. I take about 2 or 3 more hits and the blood's running down my face. I think my nose is broken. It's not. But I have like $480 cash in my pocket because my roommate had just paid his rent and he paid his rent in cash. So I know if I take my wallet out, they're just going to take the wallet and they're going to take every single dollar I've got. So I kind of put my hand up like this so they'll stop hitting me. And I reach down into my pocket with the top 2 fingers. And I get the top of one $20 bill. And they ran off with that.
Oh, wow. You got lucky.
Yeah. They could have taken my car. They could have killed me. I mean, assuming I didn't see the bullet in the gun. I'm not, to this day, I'm not even necessarily convinced that it was loaded or maybe it wasn't a real gun. It might have been a replica because he hit me with the barrel. And it would strike me that if you were going to like pistol whip someone, you wouldn't whip them with the front end of a loaded barrel.
Well, so there is a caveat to that. If you want to control where the barrel is, it is actually kind of advantageous to do that. So, So like if you're going to shoot somebody right after that, like the Army actually trains you to do a thing with a rifle called a muzzle thump. So imagine you're pointing a rifle at somebody who's real close to you and you don't want to shoot them. You just throw your body weight behind the barrel of the rifle and thump them in the chest with it real good.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So like, don't take a chance with a firearm. But that does kind of relate to something we've been talking about, in that your social conditioning, even that guy, his social conditioning is to not to kill somebody. And that's something that happens in war and happens when you're training soldiers, is that you train people to get over that. Especially now, the Army has actually trained people to the point where they don't shoot high on purpose anymore.
Yeah.
A lot of people miss on purpose or subconsciously because they don't want to kill somebody. But with exposure to combat and exposure to training, you get over that real fast. And that's something that's really pernicious, especially about a civil war. In this case, is that these guys who are fighting this war are getting accustomed to death and accustomed to killing people and accustomed to seeing people die. And that's one of the things where you really don't want, and there's a lot of really crappy discourse in our politics now about wanting a second civil war. That's something that you really don't want in a society, is people becoming accustomed to killing each other.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really pernicious that happened in the Spanish Civil War, and that you see as a hallmark of the Franco regime that followed it, is a lot of the people who lived through it were so accustomed to the brutality of it that the Franco regime's repression seemed like a relief from the actual violence of the war.
Yeah, because of the violence and the chaos, a lot of people just want it to be over. They don't care how it's over. And you saw that also with like the Bolsheviks too. Like,
yes.
And in fact, I think a lot of the line that was taken for suppressing the anarchists was that they just wanted the chaos to continue, which is not correct. Unless, you know, there may have been a few anarchists who were also psychopaths. But if you're a psychopath, I don't see you would not join the anarchists. You would probably be joining the whites, to tell you the truth, because that's where you think you've got the best chance of winning. And those are people who are more willing to tolerate your bullshit.
I mean, it would depend on the area too. I mean, a lot of really messed up people are attracted to war because, again, pathological situations attract pathological personalities. But the thing about the anarchists is that their goal wasn't to recruit those people, where the fascists' ideology is kind of tailored to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, it's really interesting also because this sort of reminds me of when I was acting in Tecumseh, which is a play about the Indian chief by the same name, Native American, Shawnee war chief, who almost built a coalition against the Americans, like literally came this freaking close. And the only way he was actually stopped was William Henry Harrison, future president of the United States, went towards his village at Tippecanoe, and he was under orders. He couldn't attack them. So he had his troops get really close to the village and do troop maneuvers. With the intention of provoking an attack. And Tecumseh was gone from the village. His brother Tenskwatawa was in control, and they had brought together a lot of these Indian tribes under a religious revival. And Tenskwatawa had told the other Indians that essentially go and attack those American troops, and as long as you can hear my voice and hear my drum, their bullets will bounce off you. And like normally Native Americans fought, especially Shawnee, they fought like guerrilla fighters. They fought from ambush, and this has been very effective against the against whites. But this is one of the only times that Native Americans just straight up charged, like embedded American troops with like cannons and muskets and everything, and bayonets. And if you go by attrition, the Shawnee won that battle they killed way more whites than Shawnee were killed. But the Harrison's troops managed to break through Tecumseh's lines and burn the village of Tippecanoe. And this proved to the Native Americans that this religious revival that they'd all been gathered under was a lie, because Tenskwatawa had lied to them. And so the confederation that Tecumseh had been building broke up right there. Now, the interesting thing about this is that one of the things that Tecumseh had predicted essentially was that this huge earthquake was going to come, where forests would fall, lakes would appear where there were no lakes before. And when that event happened, all tribes would converge on Tippecanoe, and it would become the heart of the new united Indian nation and push the whites back into the sea, or at least back past the Alleghenies. And it actually happened. Like, the earthquake that he predicted happened. It did level forests. It did create lakes. But by the time this happened, the Confederation had already fallen apart, and he had maybe 5,000 troops. And so he was killed. He signed a deal with the British and then was killed fighting up in, where was it? Up in Canada. But he's prophesized like Durruti, like Buenaventura Durruti, in a lot of ways. He's prophesized to return.
I've actually got two things that kind of relate to our reading based on that. One interesting thing, because you're going to see a lot of propaganda in this war as we go forward, is that battle actually spawned the first successful election slogan in U.S. electoral politics.
To Tippecanoe and Timber.
Tyler too, yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that there's 3 levels of warfare that you have to analyze. And this, again, comes from Clausewitz. If you're interested in warfare and military science, kids, pick up a copy of On War. Do it. It's free on Project Gutenberg. But there's tactical, operational, and strategic. And those are the 3 levels of warfare. Tactical could be considered Orwell in the trench, trying to fight the other guy. So Clausewitz also says that warfare is a duel on the larger scale. So tactical would be the duel. Operational would be like a division level. So the theater that he's in would be like the division level. And strategic would be the overall picture of the war. And what we were talking about earlier with the war industry would be a strategic thing that disadvantaged the left. Operationally, their lack of ability to maneuver their troops because their trucks would get lost and their trains only ran at like 20 miles an hour would be a disadvantage for them. And tactically, their disadvantage would be like that they had not uniform ammunition, they didn't have enough rifles. So when you're looking at warfare, you can win an operational or tactical battle, like you were talking about just now with Tecumseh, but you can lose the strategic objective and be set way back.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does. And Clausewitz is one of the great military philosophers of all time, and warfare in the Western sense still happens along Clausewitzian lines. Because you identify something in Clausewitz called a center of gravity, which is exactly what it sounds like because Clausewitz applied the physical sciences to military science. So what you were talking about earlier with the war industry, that could have been a center of gravity. Clausewitz specifically takes France as an example and notes that Paris is pretty much the center of gravity for France in the war. If you take Paris, you knock France out of the war. But you can also apply it on the tactical level. So in the valley that they're in, the center of gravity might be controlling advantageous firing positions. Or operationally, it might be controlling a railroad. And that's something that when you're analyzing war, you really kind of have to apply uniform and not uniform, but organized thinking to warfare. And in a way, Clausewitz is almost dialectically materialist in his analysis of warfare. It's a super interesting book. It's just, and I'm going to preface this, my high recommendation for this is super dry because it's written by a literal Prussian field marshal at their Kriegsschule, which is their war college. So I do warn you about that one, kids. But if you want to understand how warfare works in the modern era, you really have to read Clausewitz. A lot of people read Sun Tzu, and Sun Tzu is very valuable for like the political and like the kind of Machiavellian aspects of warfare. But Sun Tzu, I don't know if you've read it, but Sun Tzu writes in a very...
I have not. I just have really annoying friends that keep telling me to read it.
Yeah. So Sun Tzu writes in a Confucian teacher kind of way where he writes a sentence and then he lets other people expound on what the sentence means. So like he'll say like all warfare is deception, and then you'll get a copy of The Art of War with like 3 or 4 paragraphs about what that means. Whereas Clausewitz will tell you something like, and this is an actual quote from On War, and it applies to our reading again tonight, is that any commander that loses a defensive action in mountainous conditions should be shot. And then he'll go into great detail about why you shouldn't lose a defensive action in the mountains, because you have the perfect position. You can essentially just throw rocks at people and defend it.
Mountain folk are hard to control. Nobody beats the people in the mountains as long as they can stay there and remain eating.
Well,
by the way, to interrupt you really quickly, I just want to read this from the chat. Munda again. It says, Brenton Lengel, BTW, I just watched Anarcho, Anarcho being my short play about anarchists trying to run a pizza shop in post-revolutionary Brooklyn. You're a genius. Keep it up, lol. Thank you, dude. I really appreciate that. It's a great play. Anybody who's watching, like after this stream ends, go check it out. It's very short.
If they put pineapples on it, I'm joining the fascists.
Have you seen Anarcho? You should watch it if you haven't seen it.
I'll give it a look.
Yeah, it's Bob's Burgers meets Occupy Wall Street, basically.
That's great.
Yeah. So anyway, so Mustache. Let's continue. So we've got the blown out war. We've got about 15 minutes left to go. So let's zero in on the chapter and kind of finish out strongly with your reactions and observations.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of like a transit chapter. He's literally kind of going to the front, and it's his first few impressions. And the things that I really want people to kind of take away from this are the effects that he sees of war on Spain. and that war is a really messy thing. So he sees all of the basic institutions of society kind of breaking down. He sees a destroyed city. He sees the fact that the Spanish countryside is not developed. He sees the causes of the war and the effects of it. And I think that's really interesting. And he writes it in a way that's very kind of almost like a travel log of it. But as you're paying attention to it and you're viewing it through like a lens of military science and you're viewing it through a lens of like political theory, you're seeing the nasty, nasty, nasty effects of a civil war on a society. You're seeing that town that's completely broken down to the point where they're using everything as a latrine. You see the bullet holes on the wall where people have been executed, probably by both sides, to be honest with you.
Yeah. There's a line from that song by The Clash, Bullet Holes in the Cemetery Walls.
That's a great song, man.
Yeah, phenomenal.
It is. And then you also see the fantasy. I always refer to it as a masculine fantasy of war, where you're just going to dominate and take over, versus the actual reality of it, where it's a very boring thing that's punctuated by moments of pure horror. And you see that no matter what your fantasy of the war that you're going to participate in, everybody ducks, everybody's afraid, and everybody's miserable. And as somebody who's like a vet, and as somebody who is interested in studying war as a phenomenon, reading this chapter should really show you that you really don't want a war unless you absolutely have to fight it. And that's kind of what I'm taking away from it, as well as all the other philosophical things and a lot of Clausewitz that I've been citing.
Now, it's really interesting, by the way, that you mentioned that, and I agree 150%. And it's great to have because I see it from a conceptual thing. I read Homage to Catalonia, and my brain is like, how do I turn this into a play? How do I make this story work? Yours is, oh God, like here is war, since you have that experience. But it's funny that you talk about exposure, and this is a minor spoiler, because I'm not going to go into the details of it, but Orwell does get shot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I forget which chapter it is, so we should probably leave it until there. But it's interesting, like, that he complains. He's like, oh, I'm mad at myself for ducking, when later on, not ducking kind of becomes a very big problem for him.
It does. And like, if you have that fantasy in your head as you're thinking about warfare, and you think that like people who duck are cowards, just remember that courage is fear that said its prayers. Like, it doesn't mean that you're not afraid. If you read the accounts of actual like war heroes, if you read like Audie Murphy, his poetry, or like the actual little essays that he wrote about his life, he was I don't know if you're familiar with Audie Murphy. Are you familiar with
I am, actually. I've been to the Audie Murphy Memorial on the Appalachian Trail. I put a little stone on it.
I was in the 3rd Infantry Division, so he was our big war hero. But he was terrified when he was doing all the amazing things that he did. All of the great war heroes were terrified. And even if it's just in your everyday life, if you're scared of doing something, there's a great G.K. Chesterton quote where he says that no man should leave anything in the world of which he is afraid. That doesn't mean that you're not afraid of something. It means that you kind of conquer your fear. So if you're taking something away from that, just remember that, like, it's okay to be afraid. It's not okay to let your fear rule you.
Yeah. And I can play off that in a couple of ways. For one, this is my Buddhist approach to the negative aspects of life. Because one of the big things in like Soka Gakkai is when something really bad happens to a person, we don't call it a tragedy, we call it an obstacle. And the fact is that the only way any of us get better, in a Buddhist sense, closer to enlightenment, but also just if you're not a Buddhist, if you're just interested in your own life, when you look at negative circumstances as a problem, as opposed to an obstacle that you can engage with and overcome, or at the very least refuse to be defeated by. And that's really the only way anybody advances. Otherwise we stagnate. And I can talk about it like that. And I can also talk about it in the sense of, in a fight. When I did my 15-man kumite to get my shodan in Kyokushin karate, I had just finished. We were at a karate retreat on a mountain in the Berkshires. And this was actually just very close to the Appalachian Trail. And what I went through in that 15-man Kumite, I would consider the Appalachian Trail in 30 minutes. Like everything that I went through over those 6 months, just jam pack that kind of difficulty into 15 minutes. And I remember I went into the fight, and the main thing that I was worried about was running out of steam, because I'm a big guy and I hit really hard, but it's not like I can knock people out in this. I have to do 15 2-minute fights in a row, no rest, no water, go, full contact. And so like I'm in there and I'm trying to control myself and keep the keep from breathing, to keep my breathing controlled and protect myself while I'm fighting a bunch of other black belts who are there to hurt me, and they know they're there to hurt me. And I just have to survive this. 3 fights in, 6 minutes in, oh God, I don't know if I can do this. 5 fights in, I definitely can't do this. 10 fights in, like, wait, what's my name again? 14 fights, I realize, oh my God, I'm going to do this. I've like, you almost have a out of body experience where I watched another black belt, a guy who was actually beating the crap out of me in this fight. And during the fight, like as he's beating me, there's a voice came from inside me. I couldn't control it really. And it was just like, I would whisper, like as he's hitting me, I'd whisper like, please stop. And he literally was like, I'm not going to stop. And like, nails me.
We got to exchange some fight stories on a stream sometime.
This sounds cool. We'll totally do it. We'll do a fight stream. Do you guys want to hear a fight stream? The 9 people.
Because I got one like that because I was about 210 pounds in an amateur tournament.
Yeah.
And me and this dude came out and we both.
Sure. Well, hang on. We'll talk about that, but let me finish this because
sorry.
You were just talking about. I don't want to get distracted here.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm doing this fight, and what had amazed me about him was I saw him take an uppercut straight to his solar plexus, which is, it's brutal. Knocks the wind out of you. That's how I won my first full contact fight. Like I need a guy in the solar plexus, and boom, down. And like I know how much that hurts. This dude takes the hit and has to keep fighting because he's going for his black belt and he cannot stop. And I asked him before, I was like, how the hell did you do that? And he said, well, I got to this point and I realized like the pain was there. But I also realized it's not going to kill me. Yeah. So I just acknowledged it, accepted the pain, and kept going. And that seems to me to be in much the same way that like overcoming something with courage, you accept the fear and you keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the exact story that I was going to tell, is that I was about 210 pounds at the time. I'm a little heavier now because I haven't been doing PT during the pandemic.
You and me both.
Yeah. And me and this dude, we just matched up perfectly. And we both came out and threw 75 punches in 3 minutes apiece.
Oh, wow. And
that's a big deal for people who don't know about fighting. And we were both dying. And I go back to my corner and my trainer goes like, do that again. I'm like, I can't do that again. I didn't even want to go back out, but I decided that I was going to fight just for like the championship of that minute.
Yeah.
And I actually wound up winning that fight because the other dude fell over.
That sounds a lot like my first full contact fight. Like, because I got into it and I was like, oh my God, I have never been more tired in my entire life. Yeah. I just want to stop. I don't know how much longer I can go. Oh, he's on the ground.
And if you extend that, because again, Clausewitz says that warfare is a duel on a larger scale. If you extend that to warfare, you have to conserve your strategic resources, because as you use strategic resources and strength, you lose it. Mm-hmm. You have to realize that you're fighting another entity that if you view it as a body, you can kind of effectively view it. You can realize where their center of gravity is. You can realize how much kind of strength they have for the fight. And that's something that is very important when you're analyzing a conflict like the Spanish Civil War, is to kind of view it as a duel between two bodies on a larger scale, but also politics extended through violence. And that's kind of the really important lens through which Clausewitz gave us to view warfare. And that's something that's going to be a theme as we go forward, I think.
Yeah, which is very interesting, just as we talk about it, like within the anarchist sense of the thing. Because again, they've got the line, trenches full of poets.
Yeah.
The anarchists are doing something very contrary to our nature. when war comes into it.
Yeah.
Because again, like most anarchists, most leftists tend to be motivated by a great love for humankind and for a desire to promote life and human flourishing. It's like Che Guevara said, it may seem strange, but a revolutionary is motivated by great feelings of love.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a lot of, ideological a lot of ideological motivation when you go into warfare, but also it can lead to problems, I think, when you get confronted with the reality of warfare and what it is. Now, yeah. I'm not going to say that because fascists are even bigger fuck ups. So,
completely. Yeah. And you did a stream with a guy who wrote the Alice in Wonderland Civil War kind of comic.
Yeah.
And people view
Dave Peppers. Alice in Wonderland. It's Wizard of Oz.
Excuse me. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's
I always get those two screwed up in my little messed up brain. But you view soldiers as kind of like a tin man who's doing something like heartlessly. But most soldiers, if you actually talk to them on any side of a warfare, are doing that out of great love, like you were talking about with Che Guevara. Like the Tin Man in Wizard of Oz. I almost said Alice in Wonderland again, but I stopped myself. He has heart all along, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that you find in a lot of your warrior class, is that they love their comrades, they love their brothers in arms, they love their society, and that's why they're fighting. And that's something that's also important to realize when you're analyzing any war, is that people are doing these incredible things out of a great sense of duty and love. These anarchist guys aren't just out to kill the capitalists because they're bloodthirsty heathens. They're out to try to build a better society. And Orwell didn't enlist just because he's a tourist, even though I kind of criticize him a little bit for writing a little bit like a travel log. But he really does view this as building a better world. And that's something that's also very important to people when they're analyzing war, because it's something I notice a lot in our society, is that we view war as this abstract thing that happens because of mustache twirling people, but it's the extension of politics, and people don't go to war just for fun. They go to war for ideological motivations.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember about stopping war is to change the politics that lead to war, is to head off the pathological circumstances that cause wars at their root. And I think that's a great lesson from the Spanish Civil War, where if the people of Spain, or if the governing class of Spain, had managed to lead off the pathological circumstances that led to this awful conflict at the root, they wouldn't have had this civil war. And that's something that's very important for us now, especially as we have failed right-wingers who are calling for another civil war, is to head off the awful pathological circumstances that we have now.
The sort of negative feedback loop that we have going on right now, where
correct,
the police do something incredibly brutal, protesters show up to protest that thing, the police respond by being even more brutal, protesters respond with greater protests, crazy right-wingers run in and start killing people, like what we had in was it
Kenosha? Yeah,
Kenosha, and before that, you and I, we talked about the other shooting that seemed like another one where.
Was that Austin?
Yeah, it might have been Austin. It was definitely Texas. It was the one where it looked like, again, the guy wanted to use the self-defense motivation, but
it's messed up that we're having trouble remembering.
Yeah, because there's been so many. There was the car attack in Portland and all that. Like, we do need to disrupt this negative feedback loop, and if we don't, we see what happens with Spain.
Exactly.
And this is also very important for, like, if anybody who's listening, I don't think I have any fascists in my audience, but there's people out there, because I always hear this when I debate the fascists and people on the far right, like when I debated about Trump and the riots, they have this idea that, like, they're like, oh, these people are just rioting for give us stuff, and we can't give it to them because they won't stop rioting. They'll keep taking and taking and taking. That's not a healthy way to look at it, because really these kinds of problems are not problems that can be solved by violence. And even in situations like where Franco ultimately won after destroying half the freaking nation, Franco's rule did not endure. past his life.
No, even the POUM actually stuck around and was legalized in I think 1977 when they were moving more towards democracy again. So keep at it too.
Yeah. The fact is the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice.
Yes.
And in a lot of ways, for the left, it is. We need to play the long game, because the fact is that on a long enough timeline, we always win.
Yeah,
always.
Because the fascists are fuck ups.
Yeah, they're complete and utter fuck ups, and the past is always destroyed by the future.
Yes.
So this has been great, and I've got a couple people talking about. Have you heard of Musashi Zen Buddha Samurai? I have heard. I need to look into that.
That's a great book, man. Like I've got a copy of Book of the Five Rings on my bookshelf. I actually read that when I'm like feeling down. Like read that book like today. Like if you're listening to this, like read that like today. Go to Barnes and Noble and buy it today.
And Zen in here says, "You make me miss my karate days." That's awesome. Yeah. Revolutions don't have to. This is from Buzz. Revolutions don't have to be violent. The 25th of April in Portugal is proof of that.
Yeah,
I would agree. I'm not familiar with the 25th of April in Portugal. Are you familiar with that, Bobby?
Passingly, Portugal had a really hard right administration for a long time, and that's kind of what led them out of it. I'm not like intimately familiar with that. When I did my dictators course in college, I focused on Tito, so I'm more of a Yugoslav bro. But yeah, he's absolutely right. We have that force that's happening now in America with our protest movements and more broadly, I guess, the Bernie Sanders movement in our politics, where we're trying to kind of seize control of the major party, the Democrats, and build kind of a better society peacefully instead of with arms.
I'll tell you guys, because YouTube skews young, so people may not quite realize how incredible what Bernie did was, and what a chance there really is, even though he was suppressed. Like what he built, like that constituency, that's unheard of in American history. We haven't seen anything like that since Eugene v. Debs, and I think he got closer than Eugene Debs.
Significantly. I mean, Debs ran for president from jail after the Pullman strike, but
and got like 30% of the vote.
Did that's impressive. But Sanders has built an actual constituency in one of the two major parties in the country, and that's super important. And it's also super important to remember, like the Spanish Civil War built up over decades. Projects of changing the politics that lead to pathological circumstances. I'm an older millennial. I think you are too. We kind of have the instant gratification thing that's been built up by the culture industry over years, but we have to realize that these political ends are decades-long projects.
Yeah, they absolutely are.
Yeah, like it's not going to be solved by one election. It's going to be solved by like a decades-long project to avoid pathological circumstances like we're discussing in the review of this book.
Yeah, but Buzz is giving us the story, by the way, of the Portugal. Portugal was living under dictatorship, and we were having crazy war in our colonies in Africa. Yeah, Portugal was a fascist nation for quite some time, till the day the military just had enough with the wars and marched that day and kicked out of the government. Hell
yeah. And the thing to kind of remember is, I got into a little spat on Twitter about this. Kind of soldiers don't choose the wars and they don't choose the policies. Soldiers are tools of the politics. So if you have a problem with the wars, if you have a problem with the military state, you got to change the politics. And the military changing the politics there was beneficial in that case, but you don't always want a top-down revolution like that. Keep active, guys, is kind of what I'm saying on that one.
Absolutely keep active. And we even talk about that. And by the way, we also have Airbender BBX, which is a great freaking name.
I still haven't seen that show. I got to watch it.
Oh, you haven't seen oh my God. Yeah. You should totally you need to check out the last you need to check out Avatar: The Last Airbender. And also check out Legend of Korra afterwards, which isn't quite as good and it's somewhat politically illiterate. Oh my God. This is the craziest thing. So I was in a chat with some right-wing chuds.
I'm sorry.
After one of the debates that I'd done on Donald Trump. Because you'd said you'd like gone into the chat and checked it out, and you were like,
with the smoke monster,
yeah. So I showed up in this chat, and like they, one of them, when I was trying very hard to explain anarchism, and the dude just wasn't getting it and stuff. And I noticed that he tried to make the point that anarchism always leads to dictatorship. And not only that, like, and I realized where he got it from. It was fucking Legend of Korra.
Oh God. So like, if you're totally unfamiliar with anarchism and the principles of anarchism, there's a really cool movie called A Fistful of Dynamite, and it's also called Duck You Sucker. And it's on Amazon Prime right now, and they actually talk about like revolutions and hierarchy in that, and it's a kind of cool primer to get you into reading other things. So if you have Amazon Prime, which pretty much everyone does, go watch that right now.
According to Buzz, it's also known as the Carnation Revolution because of the day people were putting carnations on the barrel of the guns in the military. Yes, hell yeah.
Hell yeah. I mean, we did that in America and after Kent State.
Yeah, which was really important. And we still have those beautiful. Yeah, it's weird that those moments have been kind of made fun of in popular culture, but really you put yourself in that position and you actually walk up and pop a fucking flower in the barrel of a gun pointed at you. Holy shit.
That's courage, man. That's real courage.
Yeah. So Airbender, I thank you so much for coming. And yeah, I'm glad you found us after the debate. Bobby and we're going to be streaming more of the Homage to Catalonia, and I still need to track down an artist and find the time to transliterate my screenplay on Daruti into a comic series, but I will be running a Kickstarter to pay for that, and that'll be an amazing graphic novel once it's done. And I'm hoping I haven't officially, my publisher Scout Comics, I'm sure they're going to be interested in doing it, but I until I sign the thing, I never say where it's coming from, because who knows what's going to happen there. All in all, though, I think like the thing to kind of leave people on, Bobby, since what's you sort of have spelled out like what this chapter has so far for Homage to Catalonia. What do you want to leave people with?
Really, keep active, guys. Keep in activism and avoid the pathological situations that led to this breakdown of society is what I really want to leave people on. Also realize that peaceful revolution is possible. Fascists and right-wing people like to exude power, but they're not impossible to overcome, which you can see from examples like this and numerous other examples in history. And realize that everybody ducks. Everybody's scared sometimes, but the trick is to overcome that fear. And really, seriously, like if you're in danger, duck. And metaphorically and literally, like duck. It's a good idea, kids. Yeah,
just duck, you idiot.
Yeah.
I'm going to point something out. Interestingly enough, so one of the things that I've been doing in my off time is I've been playing Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice.
Is that good? Because I've been.
It's really good.
Yeah. Okay.
It's really hard. It's harder than Dark Souls.
I've been waiting for Cyberpunk. So
I would highly recommend Sekiro. It's a great game. Did you play Dark Souls?
I've played The Surge, and I played another Souls-like.
Okay,
and I can't remember.
Hopefully, with Sekiro, what's really interesting about Sekiro, Vampire. Okay, so with Sekiro, your instincts from Dark Souls, because I played all three Dark Souls and Bloodborne, your instincts are going to not serve you well in Sekiro. Sekiro is a game about sword on sword. And you actually had me thinking about this when you were talking about warfare, because when you go in to fight a boss in Sekiro, like the way the game trains you, you have to be trained to be patient.
Yeah,
and also to be extremely aggressive with the boss and to be up there like with your sword, and basically like
so it's like actual fencing.
Yeah, the process is you breaking down your opponent's guard to where they cannot guard anymore, and then you do a death blow. And very much also, I will say, like as a karateka, that's how you actually win a fight.
Yeah, I fenced too, and that really is realistic.
Yeah, so Sekiro, great. And I'm going to do a stream on Sekiro once I've beat the last two bosses, because there's some really interesting themes that would be relevant to my audience here in regard to intergenerational politics and especially children. Sekiro has some very interesting things to say about children and children and authority. and it's phenomenal. So as soon as I'm done and I have a full picture of Sekiro, I'm gonna
check out Vampire too, because Vampire is set in London in 1918 in the flu epidemic, and you play as a doctor who becomes a vampire, and he has to both manage the people who are sick and his own vampiric bloodlust.
That's terrific. Well, folks, if you guys can, please like and subscribe, share the channel. We're growing very, very quickly. Also, Bobby, his podcast, the 5x5, possibly rebranding to Mustache Mafia. The YouTube channel for it is in the description. He's also got a number of episodes on SoundCloud. Do you want to plug your pluggables, Bobby? I think you've got the your Twitter and everything.
Yeah, I'm Mustache Bob 2 on Twitter. I'm Mustache Mafia or 5x5 podcast on SoundCloud. I'm Mustache Mafia on YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, join the conversation. If I'm wrong on something and you think you want to talk to me about it, please feel free to. I really want to engage the audience. One of my goals in this is to actually start a dialectic, start a conversation with people. So you really reach out and talk to me. I'm pretty available because I'm locked down from COVID.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, he's one of the smarter leftists that I know, and he actually understands cultural Marxism,
which really isn't a thing, but that's a whole nother stream.
You understand the Frankfurt School, though. You read the whole
read Adorno. It's great books.
It'll depress the hell out of you, but
it'll ruin Gable too. So
Yeah. Well, anyway, I will catch you guys on the flip side. Look for my next poetry reading. I'm going to be reading something by Neil Gaiman, and that'll be to celebrate the breaking 1,000 subs on YouTube. And also, Caleb and I should be streaming together very soon. I will catch you guys on the flip side. And like and subscribe and share. Peace.